Hi, my name is Scott Desert-Blinn, and I wanted to share something with you that I've noticed recently. Every year it seems that some pundit comes out talking about the war on Christmas being waged by the liberal arm of the government or the ACLU or that most hated group, atheists. We hear about them tell stories of the Ten Commandments being forcibly pulled out of public spaces, and we hear them saying that the idea of the separation of church and state is being abused and being used for reasons that the Founding Fathers never actually intended. The more informed among them will even tell you that the separation of church and state was never part of the Bill of Rights or was never part of the Constitution or even the Declaration of Independence, and that's true. They'll tell you that the phrase, the separation of church and state, was actually written in a letter by Thomas Jefferson, a personal letter to the group of Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut. All of that is true. We're in a crisis, they'll tell you, a battle for the very soul of the country. We're in a war, and the anti-Christian forces are winning. If they're to be believed, if these cable news anchors are to be believed, then the horrors of Happy Holidays are just one step to the slippery slope of the forces of secularism. Now, it can't be denied the vast majority of Americans are religious. We're Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists. Truth be told, there isn't a lot of agreement among these groups. They have radically different beliefs that can't be reconciled. And it's difficult, if not impossible, to create a set of laws that will take into account all these different belief systems. But the question is, should we? Really? I mean, we're a democracy. We make our laws by voting. So if the majority of people in the country are Christian, then we should be able to set the standard of belief in the country. I mean, if we are mostly Christian, then Christian belief should be setting Christian laws for a Christian nation and creating the policies and practices of this country. But before we go too far down that line of thought, I would like to ask you one question. What kind of Christian legislation should we make? Should it be Catholic, Protestant, Evangelical, Pentecostal? Should it be Presbyterian? Should it be Episcopal, Lutheran, Mormon, Jehovah's Witness? Should it be UCC, United Church of Christ? All of these denominations have differences that at best were bad enough and deep enough for the adherents to leave their parent congregations, and at worst have been responsible for some of the worst atrocities, tortures, and violence that we can barely even imagine today. Religious belief is different from any other kind of belief. If I tell you that I can juggle and you don't believe me, it's pretty easy for me to demonstrate that fact. If I think that a one-payer healthcare system is the best system for our limited resources, then we can use some logics and economic theory, do some small-scale experiments, and figure out the validity or wisdom of such a move. If I believe that gravity is caused by local fluctuations in the space-time continuum, then I can do some math, come up with some ideas, we can design an experiment to test that and verify that hypothesis. But if you tell me that homosexuals shouldn't be allowed to marry because your holy text says so, there's no argument I can bring to bear that will convince you. There's no experimental evidence that you will accept. So where does that leave our foundling Christian nation? Cursed by our rock-solid faith to a doom of divisive discourse? No. Our founding fathers came up with an idea. An experiment, a noble experiment, tried for the first time here in this country. In our Constitution, they created a list of rights that were available, given, granted to every citizen. A list of rights that are inviolate, sacrosanct, and central to our core civilization. The very first sentence of the very first amendment of the Constitution, the first right granted to us in the Bill of Rights, reads as follows: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. They understood something that we have forgotten. The bloody revolutions and usurpations of Catholic kings versus Protestant princes were fresh in their minds. They came from a culture that was shaped by the violence, the bloodshed and oppression born of political power bound to religious zealotry. As unfair, at worst, today, if I came out and said I was an atheist, maybe a few of you would distrust me. I might lose a friend or two. And if the University of Minnesota's polling data is to be believed, I can give up any hope of a political career. As unfair as that is, it's actually a mark of an amazing success of this experiment. You see, before the creation of this secular society, and even today in countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran, if I came out as an apostate, that would be a death sentence for me. Turning my back on the faith of my fathers is a death sentence. And the very thought of being an atheist is unthinkable. So they created a system where the government would have no powers to make any religious law. And more importantly, it would not prohibit the free practice of any religion. Now that's a part, there are a lot of people who disagree with this law, but they've glossed over that very important section. The Establishment Clause, as it's called, is the ultimate live and let live statement. It is not an indictment of religion or a ban. It is protection, a guarantee that no matter who is in charge, no matter what religion the majority is, you will not have your right to practice your religion taken from you. No one has the right. For those of us with few or no religious beliefs, and for those of us in the vast minority, it gives us safe harbor and protection from the potential storms of religious intolerance. And for everyone else, it gives them the ability to practice as they see fit and prevent other groups from crying heretic, or even worse, bringing them on charges of blasphemy. Although the protection offered by the First Amendment goes both ways. You do not have to submit to the religious belief of others, but in turn, you have no right to impose your religious belief on them. The fairest way to ensure that this happens is the establishment of the wall of separation between church and state. Now you might be saying, well, wait a second, didn't you just say that that was never part of the laws? That was only in a personal letter. And not only that, weren't the Founding Fathers all Christian believers? Don't we have a history and a culture of Christian belief? Well, some of that may be true. But before I get into that, there are three things I'd like to share with you. Number one, it's true. Jefferson never was able to include this separation language in any legislation. But what's not true and was not known about this letter, it was never meant to be private. It was a public letter. It was what you would call today a position statement, a position paper. And I'd like to share the specific language he uses when he says the separation of church and state. Believing that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and God, that he owes account to no one to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legislative powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. 2. To those who are still insistent that our founding fathers intended this to be a Christian nation, I offer this piece of evidence. One of the first legal actions of the Congress was the establishment of something called the Treaty of Tripoli. Now, we don't have time to go into the exact details, but there is one point that's very germane to this discussion. Article 11 of the treaty says, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims, and as the said states never entered into any act or war of hostility against any Mohammedan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries. A very clear statement, and also significant for one thing. It is one of the only pieces of legislation to ever pass with a 100% unanimous vote. No abstentions, no nays. Third, take as much time as you need. Search as long as you want. If you look in the Constitution, you will not find the words God, Jesus, or Christianity. This is the founding document of our country. All laws have to measure up to this document, and these words are not included. Taking all that into account, I think one of the greatest tragedies of our modern political life is that those who should be most feverishly and arduous defenders of the protection offered by the First Amendment are often those who argue the most vociferously against it. The First Amendment and the secular society that it spawned, they're not the enemies of religion. They are the strongest protections we have for our faith and for those of us who choose not to express that faith. Put simply, separation is not negation. Thank you.